nations that grant them asylum are then mandated to issue them travel documents, to issue them identity documents. Refugee is an individual who is not in the territory of their state of citizenship. Now, it's important to note that because we're having this conversation in the context of Pakistan's deportation drive,
Pakistan has increased its border facilities to aid the return of numerous undocumented Afghan nationals, despite refugee groups urging a re-evaluation of mass expulsions. The caretaker government intends to expel more than 1 million of the 4 million Afghans in the country. Across the border, the Taliban-administered government in Afghanistan is establishing temporary transit camps to provide assistance. Over the past month, thousands of Afghans have crossed the border. In this episode of Spotlight, we seek insights from legal expert Nimrah Arshad regarding the rights of individuals with refugee status and illegal immigrants.
The rights of refugees, the key document of international law that we need to look at is the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. Now, it's important to note that because we're having this conversation in the context of Pakistan's deportation drive, Pakistan is not a party to this convention. But this convention, which is a multilateral treaty and was signed or which came into being after World War II, essentially defines who is a refugee and then basically defines processes as to how asylum can be sought, and then what are the obligations of nations who grant asylums, and what are they allowed to do and what are they not allowed to do. And then it also sets out obligations of refugees in terms of their compliance with local laws of territories that they are seeking refuge in. Now, if we look at a few key things, first let's look at what is the definition of a refugee. Speaking about it in general terms, refugee individual who is not in the territory of their state of citizenship, and they're out of that territory because they don't particularly feel safe in that territory, or they have a fear of persecution or torture, which is why they've been forced out of that territory or have had to take that decision of traveling out of that territory. Now, under this convention, such individuals have a right to seek asylum, and nations that grant them asylum are then mandated to issue them travel documents, to issue them identity documents, to not expel them, to not forcibly return them to their nations where they're citizens of, not to subject them to arbitrary arrests, essentially, and then treat them not to confiscate their properties, not to confiscate their assets. So there are a whole set of protections that are granted to refugees under the 1951 Convention. There are other international documents as well that we find that can be used as basis for when we talk about rights of refugees. So, for example, Convention Against Torture strictly prohibits expulsion of refugees or expulsion of individuals to territories where there is a substantial risk that they will face torture. And Pakistan is in fact a signatory to this convention. Similarly, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights guarantees the right to life and security for all individuals who are present in a particular territory. They don't necessarily have to be citizens. And again, Pakistan is a party to this convention. Now, one of the key principles that we need to talk about is the principle of refoulement. This is a principle that, while it is specifically mentioned in Article 33 of the UN Convention on Refugees, it is now universally agreed that this has attained the status of customary international law. Customary international law is law that has attained the status of such law that all nations are expected to abide by it. And in fact, this principle has also been sort of reiterated by multiple judgments of our superior judiciary, where it has been held that a customary international law are rules of international law that countries, and in this case Pakistan, must abide to, as long as they're not in violation of any express Pakistani legislation. And as such, because there is no legislation in Pakistan that governs the right of refugees or governs the process of how to seek asylum and how that entire process would work, Pakistan, under the international law order, is expected to abide by this principle of non-refoulement, that it should not expel or return refugees to territories where there is a substantial risk to their life, or they might face persecution or they might face torture. So this is essentially what the global regime on refugee rights is. Now, when we come to Pakistan, as I said earlier, there is no piece of legislation that exists in Pakistan when it comes to regulating the rights of refugees or regulating the rights of asylum seekers. So we then look to other laws and then essentially also principles of international law that I have just spoken about. The first document that we look at is, of course, the Constitution of Pakistan. Article 4 of the Constitution of Pakistan says that all citizens and all persons who are in Pakistan's territory at a particular time shall be treated in accordance with law. The right to asylum has been held to be a constitutional right by the Islamabad High Court. Article 9 guarantees the right to liberty and life and security. Article 14 guarantees the right to dignity. And all of these rights are applicable to these individuals who are now being subjected to this deportation drive. There is a distinction that we make when we're talking about constitutional law. There are certain fundamental rights for which the word citizen has been used, and then there are certain fundamental rights for which the word person has been used. When the word person has been used for a particular fundamental right, that means that those rights need to be extended and afforded to anybody who's in the territory of Pakistan and not just citizens of Pakistan. So this is the constitutional framework that these refugees are entitled to be dealt in accordance with law. They're entitled to their right of life and liberty. They're entitled to dignity. They're entitled to not be subjected to arbitrary arrest and detention, which we are seeing is happening. These refugees are being harassed by police, by law enforcement agencies. They're being forced to leave everything behind. A monetary limit has been of 50,000 rupees has been imposed. When we look at the scheme of the constitution, it is very clear that major elements of this deportation drive are inherently illegal. Now, coming to essentially, because there is no legislative framework that is governing the rights of these refugees, how have these refugees been in Pakistan has been hosting Afghan refugees since 45 years now. So how have we been doing that? There are a few different things that have been happening. One set of documents that a few Afghan refugees, about 1 million or 2 million Afghan refugees have, are called proof of registration cards. These proof of registration cards are cards that have been issued by the government of Pakistan that certify the status of these individuals as refugees. Then you have cards called the ECC cards, which are the Afghan citizenship cards. Once again, these have been issued to Afghan refugees in collaboration with the International Organization on Migration. Then you have another set of individuals. We saw a huge influx of refugees from Afghanistan post the Taliban takeover in 2021, and then you have certain individuals who are undocumented. Now, the other aspect, that how are asylum seekers regulated in Pakistan? So in 1993, Pakistan signed a tripartite agreement with the government of Afghanistan and the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. So when we look at now, let's take a look at how asylum seekers are being regulated in Pakistan, or how that entire process works. So in 1993, Pakistan signed a tripartite agreement with the government of Pakistan and the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. What this does is that any asylum seeker in Pakistan registers themselves with the UN, and the UN in Pakistan works through its partner agencies, and that registration works as proof that these individuals are legitimate asylum seekers. So that's the third way. Along with the proof of registration cards and the ACC cards, this registration with the UNHCR or its partner agencies works as valid proof that these individuals are allowed to remain in Pakistan. So now, having talked about this, is essentially the broad legal framework that we've been operating in Pakistan on refugees. But now that we've seen this deportation drive, it appears that the government of Pakistan is making no distinction between people who hold these valid documents that allow them to stay in Pakistan and anybody who perhaps may not have such documents. Secondly, the government of Pakistan, in violation of Section 4 of the Pakistan Citizenship Act. Section 4 of the Pakistan Citizenship Act says that any person who is born in Pakistan will be a Pakistani citizen. This is the concept of birthright citizenship. Millions of refugees, people who we referred to as refugees. In fact, if you look at the law and if you interpret the law as it should be interpreted, who should have been granted citizenship, or who in fact were citizens just by operation of law, but they have never been granted any kind of citizenship documents. So in fact, the law is interpreted as it should be interpreted, citizens of Pakistan. So even in those terms, these deportation drive are illegal, and the government of Pakistan right now essentially has taken this arbitrary decision. We have to also see that this decision has been taken by a caretaker government who is not mandated to take any major policy decisions. And in fact, this decision was taken by something called the Apex Committee, which has no statutory or constitutional grounding. We don't know how it was formed, who sits on the committee. So when you look at all of this together, when you look at the domestic legal framework, when you look at the international legal framework, and when you look at how all of this has been operationalized, it is in fact pretty clear that this is not only in violation of Pakistan's own legal framework, Pakistan's own international commitments, but generally principles of international customary law as well. We're talking about a group of people who left their home country because they did not feel whose lives are at risk, there's a very, very substantial risk that they may be subjected to torture, who, in fact, there's some people who've never lived in that country, who were born in Pakistan. The only home that they know is Pakistan. They go to school in Pakistan, they've gotten married in Pakistan, they've had kids in Pakistan. When we talk about this conversation requires a little bit more nuance than just saying that these are illegal immigrants. In fact, a lot of these people have valid or were issued to valid documents that allow them to stay in Pakistan, including the POR cards, including the ACC cards. Now, the government of Pakistan, through various forums, have made representations that this deportation drive is not applicable to those who hold POR cards. But in fact, we've seen testimonies on social media that people who hold these POR cards are also being subjected to these drives, and these POR cards are in fact not being renewed. Then once again, if you look at, as I said, Section 4 of the Citizenship Act, which says that any person who's born in Pakistan after the commencement of that act attains citizenship as a birthright. So a lot of individuals who were born in Pakistan, whose parents may be Afghan refugees, if you just look at the law itself, they are Pakistani citizens. They should not be expelled and cannot be expelled. But because the government of Pakistan has actively decided to not issue these individuals any documents that confer citizenship on them, these individuals are not issued CNICs or issued Pakistani passports. They do not have proof of citizenship because the government of Pakistan refuses to comply. Once again, if you look at Pakistan's international obligations, it is a party to the UN Convention Against Torture, it is a party to the ICCPR, it is a party to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Customary international law prohibits Pakistan from expelling these refugees because there is a substantial risk of life to them. So when you look at all of these factors together, this current deportation drive is inherently illegal, and the government of Pakistan needs to reconsider its stance. There's a reason why over the last 45 years, we as a nation have hosted Afghan refugees. We might not have developed a legislative framework, but we've developed enough legal solutions to allow these individuals to remain in Pakistan. And if the argument is to be made that individuals need to be repatriated, there needs to be a more humane solution. If you look at just how also this entire thing has been operationalized, the government of Pakistan announced on the 3rd of October that all illegal immigrants in Pakistan must leave by the 31st of October. That's just 28 days for people to wrap up their entire lives, people to sell their homes, to sell their properties, to children who are going to school, their education will be disrupted. Girls who are going to school here in Pakistan might not be able to go to school in Afghanistan because of the policies of the Taliban government. We also saw news reports that recently, a few days ago, that this container truck which was taking a group of Afghan refugees overturned, and multiple people were killed and hordes of them were injured as well. So when you look at this entire process, you look at it from a legal perspective, but you also look at it from a humanitarian perspective. And the way this entire exercise has been carried out is also against treating people with dignity, which is a right guaranteed to these individuals under the Constitution of Pakistan. In my opinion, this drive is inherently illegal. We might see some litigation on this soon. Public interest litigation has been filed in the Supreme Court challenging this deportation drive. We should be able to get more clarity on the government in terms of what their stance was and how they're seeing it, as how they will justify it legally, because based on the sort of Pakistan's international commitments and Pakistan's own domestic legal framework, my opinion is that this is absolutely illegal.